In a small, forgotten corner of Cedar Grove, where time seems to move a little slower, lives Henry Mason, a 72-year-old retired mechanic who spends his days tinkering with broken engines and sharing stories with stray cats. Known around town as the man who never turns away someone in need, Henry finds purpose in fixing what others have given up on. But nothing could prepare him for the day when Sarah Thompson's beat-up Honda breaks down outside his garage. The 19-year-old's. I speak of determination despite hardship, reminding Henry of his own struggles decades ago. He fixes her car for free, never expecting to see her again. 3 months later, a sleek private jet touches down at the local airstrip, and Sarah steps out, no longer the struggling teen he remembers. What happened during those 3 months, and why has she returned with an offer that could change everything? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Henry Mason's alarm clock hadn't changed in 30 years, a mechanical Big Ben that Martha had given him for their 20th anniversary. Its steady tick-tock filled the pre-dawn silence of his modest bedroom. Though he was always awake before, it rang. Old habits die hard, especially for a man who had opened his garage at sunrise for over 4 decades. The morning routine was as familiar as his own reflection, slightly more weathered each day, but essentially unchanged. He ran his calloused fingers across the worn spine of Martha's favorite book on his nightstand, Pride and Prejudice, its pages dog-eared from countless readings. 5 years since she'd passed, and he still couldn't bring himself to move it. In the kitchen, his movements were precise and practiced. 1 cup of black coffee, 2 pieces of whole wheat toast, and a moment at the window watching the neighborhood cats gather for their morning meal. They were his only regular breakfast companions now, but he didn't mind. Each had a name and a story, like Rusty, the orange tabby who reminded him of the '69 Chevelle he'd restored in his youth. The walk to his garage took exactly 7 minutes, past Mrs. Henderson's rose garden and the Thompson kids' lemonade stand that appeared every summer. Cedar Grove was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, where time seemed to move a little slower and where a man's word still meant something. His garage stood at the corner of Maple and Pine, a sturdy brick building that had weathered 5 decades of changing seasons. The faded sign above the door read, "Mason's Auto Repair," in hand-painted letters that Martha had touched up every spring until she couldn't anymore. Inside, the morning light filtered through dust-streaked windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor and illuminating his father's toolbox, a heavy steel testament to craftsmanship that had fixed everything from Model Ts to modern hybrids. Henry flicked on the lights, their fluorescent hum a familiar symphony. The wall calendar still showed last month's page, a classic Mustang that reminded him of better days. He'd meant to change it, but somehow these small tasks seemed less important now. Besides, his regular customers didn't come for the decor. They came because Henry Mason could diagnose an engine by its sound, could feel a misaligned timing belt through his fingertips, and never charged more than what was fair. He pulled out the creeper from beneath his workbench, checking the wheels. Out of habit, the old rubber was wearing thin, but it still rolled smooth enough. Like him, it had aged, but refused to quit. There was something comforting about tools that had been used well and maintained with care. They developed a character that no amount of money could buy. The morning's first customer arrived precisely at 8. Bill Murphy, with his temperamental Ford pickup. The truck had more stories than miles, and Bill had more excuses than solutions for its persistent knocking sound. Henry listened patiently as Bill launched into another tale about how his grandson had probably been driving it too hard, though they both knew the real culprit was years of delayed maintenance. "She's still got some life in her," Henry assured Bill, patting the truck's hood like an old friend. "Just needs a little attention, that's all. Most things do." As he worked, Henry's mind wandered to the photograph tucked away in his toolbox. Him and Martha on opening day, her smile brighter than any chrome he'd ever polished. She'd believed in him when the bank wouldn't, had worked double shifts at the diner to help make the down payment on the garage. Everyone needs someone who sees what they could be, she'd always said, not just what they are. The morning slipped into afternoon, marked by the steady progression of shadows across his workshop floor. Each car that came through his doors had a story. Each repair a chapter in Cedar Grove's ongoing tale. There was Jenny Wilson's Volkswagen Beetle, inherited from her grandmother and kept running through sheer determination and Henry's careful maintenance. And Mike Peterson's delivery van, the lifeblood of his small bakery, always smelling faintly of cinnamon and fresh bread. Between jobs, Henry would sometimes catch himself talking to Martha, sharing little observations about the day, or asking her opinion on a particularly tricky diagnosis. The cats would listen too, perched on windowsills or stretched out on the warm hood of a freshly repaired car. In these quiet moments, the loneliness felt a little less heavy, the silence a little less empty. As the sun began its westward descent, Henry wiped his hands on a shop rag that had seen better days. Another quiet day in a string of quiet days, marked by honest work and small kindnesses. He never expected anything more, certainly never imagined that tomorrow would bring a beat-up Honda and its determined young driver into his life, changing everything. The Honda's engine announced its arrival before Henry saw it, a labored wheeze punctuated by the unmistakable sound of a failing timing belt. Through the open garage door, he watched the faded blue Civic limp into his lot, trailing a thin wisp of white smoke. The car shuddered to a stop, and for a moment nothing moved except the steam rising from under its hood. The driver's door creaked open, and Sarah Thompson emerged, her shoulders squared despite the obvious worry in her eyes. She wore cargo pants with grease stains and a faded MIT sweatshirt that had seen better days. A backpack hung heavily from one shoulder, stuffed with what looked like textbooks and a laptop. "Please tell me you're open," she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "I've got a final presentation in 3 hours, and this is the third shop I've tried. The others said they couldn't fit me in." Henry was already moving toward the car, his experienced eyes cataloguing symptoms. "Pop the hood," he said, reaching for his diagnostic tools. The hood release clicked, and a fresh wave of steam escaped into the morning air. Sarah stepped closer, not content to wait on the sidelines. "I think it's the timing belt," she offered, surprising Henry with her knowledge. "I've been nursing it along for the past month, but I couldn't afford the repair. Full scholarship covers tuition, but not much else." Henry nodded, impressed by both her diagnosis and her candor. The belt was indeed shredded, but the damage hadn't spread to the valves. A small mercy. He glanced at Sarah, seeing something familiar in her determination. It reminded him of another young person decades ago who'd chosen work over sleep to keep a dream alive. 3 hours, you said? Henry reached for his tools. Decision already made. "Let's see what we can do." As he worked, Sarah didn't retreat to the waiting area like most customers. Instead, she stayed close, asking intelligent questions about the repair process. Her eyes followed his movements with genuine interest, not just anxiety about her car. "My dad used to work on cars," she explained, handing him a wrench before he asked for it. "Before he got sick. Used to say you could solve any problem if you just listened to what the machine was telling you." Henry smiled at that. "Smart man. Your father." He paused, recognizing the past tense in her words, seeing the shadow that crossed her face. "You picked up a lot from him." "Not enough," Sarah said softly, watching Henry's careful work. "He died when I was 14, cancer. Mum works 2 jobs now, but medical bills." She trailed off, then straightened. "That's why this scholarship is so important. My research project could change how engines work, make them more efficient. If I can just get through this semester." The determination in her voice struck a chord in Henry's heart. He thought of Martha's words about seeing people's potential, about the importance of being there when someone needed a chance. 2 hours later, The Honda purred like it hadn't in years. Henry had done more than fix the timing belt. He'd addressed a handful of minor issues that would have become major problems down the road. When Sarah asked about payment, Henry waved her off. "Consider it an investment," he said, wiping his hands on his shop rag. "In whatever you're working on, sometimes all a person needs is a little help at the right moment." Sarah stood still for a moment, clutching her car keys. Then, impulsively, she hugged him, a quick, fierce embrace that caught Henry off guard. "Thank you," she whispered. "I won't forget this." He watched her drive away, the Honda running smooth. And true, unaware that this small act of kindness would return to him magnified beyond imagination. In his decades of fixing cars, Henry had learned that everything was connected. Timing belts to engines, people to dreams, past to future. But he had no way of knowing that he'd just helped set in motion a chain of events that would transform not just two lives, but an entire community. Sarah returned to the garage 3 days later, not because the Honda needed more work, but because something was pulling her back. She found Henry where she'd left him, bent over the engine of a classic Mustang, his movements precise and deliberate. "Got a minute?" she asked, clutching a worn notebook to her chest. The leather-bound journal was stuffed with loose papers and sticky notes, its edges frayed from constant use. Henry straightened, wiping his hands. "Car giving you trouble already?" "No, it's running perfectly." Sarah shifted her weight, suddenly, nervous. "Actually, I wanted to show you something, my research project. I could use another perspective, someone who really understands engines." Interest flickered in Henry's eyes. He gestured to his small office, a space he rarely used except for paperwork. Sarah pulled up a chair beside his desk, spreading out her notebook. The pages were filled with detailed technical drawings, complex equations, and margin notes in cramped handwriting. "It's a hybrid system," she explained, her earlier nervousness forgotten as she dove into the details. "But not like anything on the market. See, current hybrids waste energy during the conversion process. My design captures and reuses that energy through a modified regenerative braking system." Henry leaned closer, his practiced eye catching details that would have escaped most. The drawings weren't just theoretical. They showed a deep understanding of practical mechanics. "You've thought about manufacturing costs," he noted, pointing to a series of calculations in the margin. Sarah nodded eagerly. "That's the key. Everyone's chasing perfect efficiency, but if it costs too much to produce, it'll never make it to market. I wanted something that could be retrofitted to existing engines, something affordable." As she walked him through the design, Henry felt a familiar spark, the same excitement he'd experienced decades ago when he'd first started solving mechanical puzzles. But Sarah's vision went beyond simple repairs. She was reimagining the fundamentals of engine design itself. "The professors say it's too ambitious," she admitted, her voice smaller now, "that I should focus on something more conventional for my thesis. But my dad always said that if your dreams don't scare you a little, they're not big enough." Henry was quiet for a moment, studying a particularly intricate diagram. "Your dad was right," he finally said, "and your professors are wrong. He tapped the notebook. "This has potential." Over the next few hours, they lost themselves in technical discussions. Henry shared insights from decades of practical experience, while Sarah introduced him to new theories and technologies. The afternoon light shifted to evening, and still they talked. Two generations bridging a gap through shared passion. "You know," Henry said, reaching for an old photo album he kept in his desk, "this reminds me of something I tried back in '82. He pulled out a yellowed sketch, his own attempt at innovation from decades past. Never had the resources to develop it properly, but maybe— Sarah studied his old design intently. "This could work with my regenerative system," she said, excitement building in her voice. "The way you handled the power transfer—" "Henry, this is brilliant." They bent together over their combined ideas, adding notes, suggesting modifications. The old mechanic and the young engineer, each bringing something the other needed. Experience meeting innovation, tradition embracing future. As the day wound down, Sarah carefully packed up her notebook, now filled with additional notes in Henry's precise handwriting. "Would it be okay if I came back tomorrow?" she asked. "There's so much more I want to learn from you." Henry smiled, feeling more energized than he had in years. "On one condition," he said. "You help me with that carburetor rebuild I've got planned. Best way to understand where engines are going is to know where they've been." Sarah beamed. "Deal." She paused at the door, looking back. "Thank you, Henry. Not just for today, but for believing in this, in me." After she left, Henry sat in his office, surrounded by the ghosts of his own past dreams and the bright promise of new ones. Martha would have loved this, he thought. She always said that teaching was as much about learning as it was about sharing knowledge. He looked at the empty chair where Sarah had sat, already anticipating tomorrow's lessons, both those he would give and those he would receive. Sometimes, he realized, the greatest gift isn't just fixing what's broken, but helping build something entirely new. For 2 weeks, Sarah became a fixture at Mason's Auto Repair. She'd arrive each afternoon after her classes, carrying her notebook and often a bag of sandwiches from the diner where her mother worked. The routine became comfortable. They'd work on cars together, break for lunch, then dive into discussions about her hybrid engine design. Henry found himself looking forward to these sessions more than he cared to admit. Sarah had a way of making the garage feel alive again, filling it with questions, ideas, and occasional bursts of laughter when something went wrong. She reminded him of himself at that age, hungry for knowledge, eager to prove herself, but also carrying the weight of responsibilities beyond her years. That's why her absence on a Wednesday afternoon felt strange. Henry checked his watch again, though he knew it was well past her usual arrival time. The half-finished carburetor rebuild they'd started yesterday sat waiting on his workbench, tools laid out just as they'd left them. When his phone rang an hour later, he nearly dropped the wrench he was holding. Sarah's number flashed on the screen. "Henry!" Her voice sounded different, excited but also nervous. "I'm so sorry I'm not there today. Something's happened, something big." He set down his tools, listening intently as she continued. "Remember that engineering competition I told you about? The one where I submitted our hybrid design. Someone important saw it. Really important. They want me to fly out to California tonight for a meeting." Henry's heart swelled with pride, even as something else, something that felt uncomfortably like loss, tugged at him. "That's wonderful news, Sarah." "I don't have much time," she rushed on. "My flight leaves in 3 hours. But I couldn't go. Without telling you." She paused, and he could hear the sound of airport announcements in the background. "Everything I've learned from you these past weeks. It made all the difference. The way you showed me how to think about practical applications, cost-effectiveness. It's what made our design stand out." "Our design?" Henry questioned softly. "Of course," Sarah insisted. "I couldn't have done this without you. And Henry, this is just the beginning, I promise." After they hung up, Henry stood in his garage, feeling the silence settle back in. But it was different now, charged with possibility rather than resignation. He walked to his workbench and found a folded piece of paper he hadn't noticed before. Sarah must have left it sometime yesterday. The note was written in her familiar, hurried handwriting. "Dear Henry, if you're reading this, it means things happened even faster than I expected. I know it seems sudden, but sometimes life gives you chances you have to grab with both hands. That's what you taught me, even if you didn't say it directly. Through every careful repair, every patient explanation, every story about taking chances when they matter. I'm leaving you my notebook, the original one, with all our notes together. Keep it safe for me. There are still so many ideas we need to explore, so many things I want to learn from you. Thank you for seeing something in me worth believing in. For showing me that innovation isn't just about new ideas, but about understanding the foundations they're built on. I'll be back. That's not just a promise, It's a plan. Sarah P.S. Check the bottom drawer of your toolbox. I left something else for you. In the drawer, Henry found a small box containing a brand new digital diagnostic scanner, the kind he'd admired in a catalogue but considered too expensive to justify. Attached was another note. Because sometimes old dogs can learn new tricks. He ran his fingers over the scanner, then carefully folded Sarah's letter and placed it in his wallet next to the worn photograph of Martha. 2 pieces of paper marking different chapters of his life, one that had ended and one that somehow felt like it was just beginning. The carburetor sat unfinished on his workbench. Henry picked up his tools and began working again, but with a different energy now. Each movement was purposeful, measured, precise, not just maintaining the past, but building towards something new. Whatever was happening in California, he had a feeling this wasn't the end of their story. It was just the intermission. The Cedar Grove Gazette arrived every Thursday morning, same as it had for the past 50 years. Henry usually gave it a cursory glance before using it to line his workbench, but today's headline caught his eye. Local business closure signal. Changing times. Below was a photo of Wilson's Hardware boarding up its windows after 3 generations of service. He spread the paper across his coffee-stained desk, reading about how the highway bypass had redirected traffic, how young people were leaving for bigger cities, how the internet was changing shopping habits. The story of Cedar Grove was being written in empty storefronts and for sale signs. The diagnostic scanner Sarah had given him sat on his workbench, its screen reflecting the morning light. He'd been teaching himself to use it, mostly late at night when no one was around to see him fumbling with the modern technology. The instruction manual was dog-eared now, its pages marked with his notes in the margins. "You should advertise that you've got one of those fancy computers now," Mrs. Henderson suggested, during her weekly visit to have her Buick's tire pressure checked. "Might bring in some of those folks who've been driving to the dealership in Rivertown." Henry nodded but said nothing. The scanner wasn't about attracting new business. It was about keeping a promise to himself, about proving that an old mechanic could still learn new tricks. The weeks stretched into months. Summer faded into autumn and the maple trees outside. His garage painted the sidewalk in shades of red and gold. Henry kept to his routine, opening at sunrise, fixing what needed fixing, closing at sunset. But now he spent his evenings studying engineering textbooks borrowed from the library, trying to understand the concepts Sarah had sketched in her notebook. Sometimes customers would ask about that bright young girl who'd been around for those 2 weeks. The story had grown in the telling, as stories tend to do in small towns. Some said she was a secret millionaire's daughter, others that she'd been recruited by NASA. Henry just smiled and kept working. The notebook she'd left became his evening companion. He'd trace the drawings with weathered fingers, adding his own notes in different colored ink. The hybrid engine design was brilliant in its simplicity, but he'd spotted places where his practical experience suggested improvements. He documented everything, not knowing if she'd ever see these additions, but feeling compelled to continue their collaboration across the distance. One quiet Tuesday, Bill Murphy's grandson Tyler stopped by the garage. The boy was 17, with grease-stained hands and curious eyes that reminded Henry of another young person who'd stood in that same spot not so long ago. "Mr. Mason," Tyler shuffled his feet. "I was wondering if you could teach me about engines, real engines, I mean. Not just the computer stuff they show us in school." Henry looked up from the carburetor he was rebuilding. "What brought this on?" "Well," Tyler hesitated, "I heard about that girl who was here, how you helped her with some big invention, and I figured maybe I could learn something too." The request stirred something in Henry's chest, a familiar warmth he'd first felt watching. Sarah grasped a complex mechanical concept. He reached for his toolbox, then paused and picked up the diagnostic scanner instead. "First lesson," he said, "is understanding that old and new aren't enemies. They're partners. Pull up a chair." As autumn deepened into winter, More young people found their way to his garage. Some came out of curiosity, others with genuine interest. Henry taught them all, sharing not just mechanical knowledge, but the wisdom of patient observation, of listening to engines speak their own language. He kept Sarah's notebook close, but the ache of her absence had transformed into something else, a quiet anticipation. The town might be struggling, but in his garage something new was taking root. Every time the bell above his door chimed, he looked up with a mixture of hope and resignation, knowing it probably wasn't her, but refusing to stop expecting her return. And then, on a crisp morning in early December, the sound of jet engines echoed over Cedar Grove. The private jet's arrival brought Cedar Grove to a standstill. In a town where the biggest weekly event was the farmers' market, the sleek Gulf Stream touching down at their modest airstrip was like a spaceship landing in a cornfield. Word spread, faster than social media could handle, and by the time the jet taxied to a stop, a small crowd had gathered. Henry heard about it from Mrs. Henderson, who burst into his garage without her usual greeting about her Buick's mysterious rattles. "Henry, Mason, you need to come see this right now." She was practically bouncing with excitement, her usual reserved demeanor forgotten. But Henry stayed where he was, bent over the engine of a '72 Chevelle. His hands didn't shake, but his heart was doing strange things in his chest. He'd waited 3 months for this moment, and now that it was here, he found himself oddly hesitant. The bell above his door chimed. "Still hiding from new technology?" Sarah's voice filled the garage, different somehow, more confident, but with the same warmth he remembered. "Because that diagnostic scanner looks pretty well used to me." Henry straightened slowly, wiping his hands on his shop rag before turning around. Sarah stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the morning light. She wore a tailored business suit now instead of cargo pants, but her eyes still held that same determined spark. Behind her, through the open door, he could see a crowd of townspeople, trying to appear like they weren't watching. "Your carburetor rebuild technique still works better than anything I've seen in California," she said, stepping forward. Then, as if she couldn't help herself, she rushed across the garage and hugged him. "I missed you, Henry." He hugged her back, noticing she still smelled faintly of engine oil despite her expensive clothes. Some things, it seemed, didn't change. "The garage looks different," she observed, looking around. "More students." Henry nodded toward the study area he'd set up in the corner, where Tyler and a few other local kids would gather after school. "Seems your influence didn't stop when you left," Sarah smiled, running her hand along a familiar workbench. "I saw my notebooks gotten some additions." She pulled out a sleek tablet and pulled up some files. "So have my designs, but I think you're going to like where this is going." She set the tablet down next to an old carburetor, the contrast striking but somehow right. "Remember when you said sometimes all a person needs is a little help at the right moment? Well, I'm here to return the favor. Multiple investors want in on our hybrid engine design, but I convinced them we need something more than just another tech startup." Her eyes were bright with excitement. "We need a development facility, somewhere to build and test prototypes, somewhere with real-world experience and practical knowledge, somewhere like this." Henry looked around his garage, at the worn tools that had fixed thousands of engines, at the oil stains on the concrete floor that told stories of decades of work, at the young faces peering in through the windows with undisguised curiosity. "This is a repair shop, Sarah," he said quietly, "not a tech company." "It's both," she insisted. "That's what makes it perfect. Think about it. A place where cutting-edge technology meets hands-on experience, where students can learn both theory and practice, where we can develop innovations that actually work in the real world, not just in a computer simulation." She pulled a business card from her pocket, thick cream-colored stock with embossed silver lettering that read Thompson Mason Innovations, and set it next to his old grease-stained business card. "I'm not asking you to change who you are or what you do," she continued softly. I'm asking you to expand it, to help me build something that could change not just engines, but lives. Starting right here in Cedar Grove. The silence that followed was heavy with possibility. Through the open door, Henry could see his town, struggling but stubborn, fading but not yet gone. He thought about Tyler and the other kids, about closed shops and lost opportunities, about Martha's words about seeing what people could be. He picked up both business cards, feeling the weight of past and future in his hands. Well, he said, finally, a smile tugging at his lips, I suppose that fancy jet of yours is going to need regular maintenance. The contract sat on Henry's desk like a bridge between two worlds. 30 pages of legal language and technical specifications printed on crisp paper. Sarah had spent the morning walking him through every detail, her enthusiasm tempered by careful attention to the practical realities they'd face. The investors are offering $5 million for the initial phase, she explained, spreading out the architectural renderings. The familiar bones of his garage were still visible beneath the proposed additions, modern glass and steel growing organically from the old brick structure. But more importantly, they're letting us maintain controlling interest. This stays. Ours Henry, our vision, our way. Henry studied the plans with a mechanic's eye for detail. The main garage would remain operational but expanded. New diagnostic bays would be added, along with a research and development wing. The teaching area he'd cobbled together in the corner would become a proper classroom. And the patent rights? He asked, remembering bitter stories from other inventors who'd lost control of their creations. Sarah smiled, flipping to a tabbed section of the contract. Joint ownership between us, with exclusive manufacturing rights. I was very clear about that. They get distribution rights, but the technology stays in our hands. She paused, her expression softening. Dad always said never to trust anyone who wants to own your ideas. Through the office window, Henry could see Tyler working on Mrs. Henderson's Buick, referring occasionally to both the diagnostic scanner and an old manual. The boy had natural talent, but more importantly, he had drive, like Sarah had, like Henry himself once had. Tell me about the training program again, he said, turning back to the contract. Sarah's eyes lit up. She pulled out another document, a curriculum outline she'd developed during her time in California. We'll start with 10 students, full scholarships, hands-on mechanical training combined with engineering theory. They'll learn everything from basic repairs to hybrid systems development. She leaned forward, her voice intense. Think about it. Henry, kids like Tyler won't have to choose between practical skills and higher education. They can have both right here in Cedar Grove, and while they're learning, they'll be helping us develop and test new technologies. Henry picked up a pencil, making small notes in the margin of the curriculum. They'll need basic certification. First, he mused, can't innovate until you understand the foundations. Already factored in, Sarah nodded. First semester is all traditional mechanics. We build up from there. She paused, watching him. I had a good teacher who showed me the importance of basics. The morning light shifted across the desk as they worked through the details. Sarah had thought of everything: insurance, equipment needs, staffing requirements. The Silicon Valley efficiency was there in the planning, but so was the practical wisdom she'd learned in this very garage. There's something else, she said finally, pulling out one last document. The town council meeting minutes from last week. 3 more businesses are closing down. The bypass is killing local commerce. She met Henry's eyes. But a technology development center? That brings jobs. Brings students who need housing, food, services. This isn't just about us, Henry. It's about giving Cedar Grove a future. Henry stood up and walked to the window. Across the street, Wilson's Hardware still stood empty, its windows covered with fading papers, but he could imagine it reopened, serving a new generation of builders and makers. He could see the diner full again, the local houses renovated for Student housing, the quiet streets revitalized with purpose. Martha always said a garage was more than just a place to fix cars, he said quietly. Said it was a place where people brought their troubles, looking for help to get moving again. He turned back to Sarah. Guess maybe that applies to whole towns too. He picked up his pen, not the fancy one Sarah had brought with the contracts, but his own well-worn implement that had signed decades of repair invoices. The weight of it felt right in his hand. One condition, he said, poising the pen over the signature line. We keep the old sign. Add to it, but don't replace it. Some things are worth preserving. Sarah's smile was bright enough to light up the whole town. I wouldn't have it any other way. Partners. Partners, Henry agreed, and signed his name on the line where future met past. That evening, after Sarah left to make calls to her investors, Henry found himself alone in his garage. The familiar space felt different now, charged with possibility and the weight of decision. He pulled Martha's journal from his desk drawer, a small leather-bound book he rarely opened but always kept close. The pages were filled with her neat handwriting, dreams and observations collected over their years together. She'd had a way of seeing the future in everyday moments, of recognizing crossroads before anyone else. Henry fixed the Miller boys' motorcycle today, one entry read from 20 years ago. Spent extra time showing him how it all works. He's happiest when he's not just fixing things, but teaching others. Someday he'll realize that's his real gift. His fingers traced her words, remembering how she'd encouraged him to hire apprentices, to share his knowledge. He'd always found excuses. Too busy, too set in his ways, too comfortable with the quiet. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Tyler, holding the diagnostic scanner. Mr. Mason, I think I figured out that electrical problem in Mrs. Henderson's Buick. The boy's eyes were bright with accomplishment. Used the scanner like you showed me, but then remembered what you said about listening to the engine too. It was telling us the answer all along. Henry smiled, recognizing his own words coming back to him. Show me, he said, following Tyler. To the car. As the young man walked him through the diagnosis, Henry's mind wandered to the contracts he'd signed that morning. The garage would change, had to change, but maybe that wasn't something to fear. Maybe it was something Martha had seen coming long ago. Later that night, Henry sat in his kitchen, surrounded by old photographs spread across the table. Images of the garage's early days, of Martha's proud smile when they'd first opened, of all the small moments that had built this life. One photo in particular caught his eye, a faded Polaroid from 1982. He was standing next to his first hybrid conversion attempt, a project that had been ahead of its time. Martha had believed in it, even when others called it a waste of time. Keep that drawing, she'd said. Someday, the world will catch up to your ideas. Now, Sarah had taken that old design and given it wings, combining it with her own innovations. The past wasn't being erased. It was being built upon, growing into something new. He reached for his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. Nancy, he said when Martha's sister answered. Remember that talk we had at the funeral about Martha's dream for the garage, about making it more than just a repair shop? He paused, emotion thick in his throat. I think it's finally happening. Nancy's warm laugh came through the line. She always said you'd figure it out eventually. That garage was never just about fixing cars for you, Henry. It was about fixing whatever needed fixing. Cars, dreams, people's hopes. After hanging up, Henry returned to the garage. The night air was cool, filled with the cricket songs that had accompanied thousands of evening repairs. He walked through the space, touching familiar tools, remembering countless hours of work. In the corner, Sarah had left her tablet open to the design renderings. The old and new versions of the garage overlapped on the screen, like a visual representation of past and future merging. Henry could almost hear Martha's voice. The best gifts we give are the ones that grow beyond us. He pulled out her journal one last time, turning to the blank pages she'd never filled. Picking up a pen, he began to write. Dear Martha, today I signed papers that will change everything, but sitting here, I realize you knew this day would come. You saw it in every young person I taught, every problem I solved that wasn't just about engines. Our garage is about to become something bigger than we imagined, but its heart, the part you always believed in, that's staying the same. It's still going to be a place where things get fixed, where people learn, where dreams get their second chance. I think you'd like Sarah. She reminds me of us when we were young, full of ideas and too stubborn to quit. The future she sees is bright. Martha, and somehow you saw it first. The blueprints covered every surface of Henry's office, their blue and white lines mapping out the future. Construction crews would arrive next week, but today was about something more fundamental. The first official planning meeting of Thompson Mason Innovations. Sarah had brought in a team of experts, architects, engineers, educators, but insisted that Henry lead the meeting. "This is your home," she'd said. "You know its bones better than anyone." Standing before the assembled group, Henry felt oddly comfortable. These people in their pressed shirts and laptops weren't so different from customers bringing in troubled engines. They all needed someone who could see both problems and possibilities. "The key," he began, pointing to the garage's original layout, "is keeping the repair shop running while we build. This isn't just about creating something new. It's about maintaining what matters." The lead architect, Lisa Chen, nodded appreciatively. "We can work in phases. Start with the east expansion. Keep the main bay operational." She pulled out a revised timeline. "It'll take longer, but it preserves the business and gives us time to integrate the new systems properly." Sarah watched Henry examine the timeline, seeing how he methodically thought through each stage. She'd learned that look in their brief time working together. He was visualizing the flow, like tracing the path of oil through an engine. "Tyler," Henry called to the young man hovering uncertainly at the back of the room. "Come show them what you discovered about the electrical system last week." Tyler stepped forward, nervous but eager. Using the diagnostic scanner and his handwritten notes, he explained the unique quirks of the building's wiring, knowledge that would save hours of construction headaches later. "This is exactly why this location is perfect," Sarah told the group. "We're not just inheriting a building, we're inheriting generations of practical knowledge." The meeting flowed into afternoon, with Henry's expertise guiding them through potential pitfalls and opportunities. The plans evolved as they talked. A charging station added here, a testing bay modified there, the future taking shape through collaboration between old wisdom and new ideas. During a break, Mrs. Henderson appeared with a box of her famous apple pastries. "Thought you all might need some fuel for thought," she announced, setting them down amid the blueprints, "and I might have some questions about what this means for my Buick's future maintenance schedule." Henry watched as Sarah smoothly explained their plans for existing customers, how they'd not only continue regular repairs, but enhance them with new technology and training opportunities. Mrs. Henderson left reassured, already planning to tell her bridge club about the exciting changes coming to Cedar Grove. "Word's going to spread fast," Henry observed, remembering how quickly news traveled in small towns. "Already has," Sarah grinned, pulling up her tablet. "Local paper wants an interview tomorrow, and look at this." She showed him an online community forum where people were discussing the project. Former residents were asking about job opportunities, young families wondering about moving back. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the blueprints. Henry noticed Tyler studying the educational program outline, his expression thoughtful. "Something on your mind?" Henry asked. "Just wondering." Tyler hesitated. "Will there still be place for someone like me once all this fancy new stuff comes in?" Before Henry could answer, Sarah joined them. "Tyler, remember that electrical system you mapped out? That's exactly the kind of practical knowledge we need. Books can teach theory, but experience, that's irreplaceable." Henry nodded. "Which is why we're starting the apprenticeship program right now." He held up a document. Tyler's official acceptance as their first student apprentice, if you're interested." The boy's face lit up as he took the paper with trembling hands. Sarah caught Henry's eye, sharing a moment of understanding. This was why they were doing this, not just for innovation's sake, but for moments like these. As the meeting wound down, Henry stood in the center of his garage. Soon these familiar walls would expand, this space would transform, but the heart of it, the dedication to teaching, to fixing what was broken, to building something better, that would remain. On his workbench, next to the newest diagnostic tablet, sat his father's old toolbox. Together, they represented not a contradiction, but a continuation, a bridge between what was and what could be. The first test of their hybrid engine prototype sat on the newly installed dynamometer, its unconventional design drawing curious stares from the construction workers still finishing the east wing. 6 weeks of renovation had transformed half the garage into a state-of-the-art testing facility, while the other half maintained its traditional charm, now busier than ever. "Ready?" Sarah asked, her finger hovering over the startup sequence on the computer. Henry stood beside her, his hand resting on the engine housing, ready to feel its vibrations. "Tyler," Henry called, "come monitor the old-school gauges. Sometimes they tell you things computers miss." The young apprentice took his position, notepad ready. In the month since his appointment, Tyler had become the bridge between the garage's two worlds, equally comfortable with digital diagnostics and manual tools. The engine hummed to life, its sound unlike anything they'd heard before, the familiar combustion rhythm overlaid with the whisper of their innovative energy recovery system. Data flowed across multiple screens while Tyler watched. The analog gauges with practiced attention. "Oil pressure's steady," Tyler reported. "Temperature nominal, but there's something—" He pressed his hand against the housing, feeling what Henry had already noticed. "A harmonic we didn't expect." Henry nodded. "Sarah, check the upper frequency." Readings. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard, bringing up detailed vibration analysis. There it is. A resonance pattern in the recovery circuit. The computer models didn't predict this. "Because they couldn't," Henry said, already reaching for his tools. "This is the kind of thing you only learn by building." Tyler, grab my old stethoscope from the desk. For the next hour, they worked in perfect sync, Sarah analyzing data patterns, Tyler tracking physical symptoms, and Henry making precise adjustments. Traditional diagnostic tools worked alongside cutting-edge sensors, each revealing different aspects of the same problem. "Try it now," Henry said, tightening the last bolt on a modified mounting bracket. The engine's tone changed subtly, and Sarah's face lit up as she watched the readings stabilize. "Perfect!" she exclaimed. "The resonance is completely gone." "How did you know?" "Similar issue with a '67 Mustang years ago," Henry explained. "Different cause, same principle. Sometimes the past has answers the future hasn't discovered yet." Their success was interrupted by a commotion from the front of the garage. Mrs. Henderson had arrived for her regular maintenance appointment, but instead of her usual Buick, she was driving a brand-new hybrid sedan. "Thought it was time I embraced." "The future," she announced proudly, "but I'm only trusting you two to maintain it." "Well, you three," she added, nodding to Tyler. Henry watched as Tyler confidently began the intake process, seamlessly combining the traditional courtesy inspection with the new hybrid diagnostics. The boy had grown more assured with each passing week, his natural talent flourishing under the unique blend of mentorship. "Speaking of embracing the future," Sarah said once Mrs. Henderson had left, "look what just arrived." She opened a large case to reveal their first custom diagnostic tool, built to their specifications, combining Henry's practical insights with Sarah's innovations. The device was both familiar and revolutionary. Its housing resembled traditional mechanics tools, designed to withstand daily garage abuse, but its capabilities far exceeded anything currently on the market. Most importantly, it was designed to be repairable and upgradable, a direct reflection of their philosophy about sustainable technology. "We'll need to test it," Henry said, already examining the build quality. "Start with something simple and work our way up." "Already planned for that," Sarah smiled. "Remember that collection of impossible-to-diagnose problems you mentioned? The ones that usually turn out to be multiple issues masking each other? I thought we could use those as our test cases." Henry nodded appreciatively. She understood that the real test of any tool wasn't in the lab, but in solving real-world problems that had stumped others. As the afternoon continued, their prototype engine kept running on the dynamometer, gathering valuable data. The construction crew worked steadily on the new classroom space, and a steady stream of customers brought both old and new vehicles through the doors. Tyler split his time between helping with the prototype testing and handling regular repairs, his confidence growing with each successful diagnosis. At one point, Henry overheard him explaining to a customer how their hybrid engine design would make maintenance simpler and more affordable in the long run. "He's a natural teacher," Sarah observed. "Reminds me of someone else I know." Henry smiled, watching his apprentice work. "He's the future of this place. They all will be." He gestured to the applications already coming in for their training program. "We're not just building engines here anymore. We're building legacies." The hybrid engine hummed steadily in the background, its innovative heart beating in rhythm with the familiar sounds of wrenches turning and diagnostics beeping, a symphony of old and new playing in perfect harmony. The community board outside Cedar Grove's town hall had always been a measure of local vitality. For years, it had displayed more lost cat posters than business announcements, but today, prominently displayed in the center, was a notice that had the whole town talking free advanced automotive training program, Thompson Mason Innovations, now accepting applications for our comprehensive mechanics and engineering course. Traditional skills meet cutting-edge technology, full scholarships available for qualified local residents, special consideration for veterans and displaced workers, information session this Saturday at Mason's Garage. Henry stood before the notice, remembering when Martha had posted their first business announcement in this same spot decades ago. Back then, it had been just another repair shop opening. Now it was something more. "Fourth person today took a photo of that notice," said Carol, the town clerk, coming out to water the flowers beneath the board. "My grandson's already filling out the application. Says it's better than any program he got into at the state college." Inside the garage, the information session was already overflowing. Sarah had expected maybe 20 people. Over 50 had shown up. They'd had to move chairs from the diner next door to accommodate everyone. Tyler stood at the front with Sarah, sharing his experience as their first apprentice. His natural enthusiasm was infectious as he demonstrated their prototype diagnostic tool, showing how it combined traditional mechanical knowledge with advanced technology. "Last month, I helped diagnose a problem that stumped 3 other shops," Tyler explained to the rapt audience. "Not because we have fancier equipment, though we do," he grinned, "but because Mr. Mason taught me to listen to both the engine and the data. Here, you learn to use everything at your disposal." In the back, Henry noticed Mike Peterson, owner of the struggling local hardware store, taking detailed notes. After the presentation, Mike approached him. "Henry, you remember my shop used to do small engine repair before the big box stores moved in?" Mike's eyes had a spark Henry hadn't seen in years. "Been thinking, with all these new people coming to town for your program, maybe it's time to restart that service. Maybe even partner with you folks on some training." Similar conversations were happening all over town. The diner had extended its hours to accommodate students and workers. The old Miller Place, empty for 3 years, was being renovated into student housing. Even the abandoned movie theater was under negotiation for reopening. "It's like watching dominoes fall in reverse," Sarah observed during their evening review meeting. Each small change triggers another positive development. She pulled up the latest community impact report on her tablet, a requirement from their investors that had become a source of pride. Employment was up 15% since they'd started. Housing prices had stabilized. New businesses had filed 6 permits in the past month alone. "Look at this," she said, showing Henry an email. "The State University wants to discuss a partnership. They're interested in making our program part of their engineering curriculum." But what really caught Henry's attention was the scene outside his office window. Tyler was working late, teaching 2 other young apprentices how to use the diagnostic scanner on an electric vehicle. His patience and clarity reminded Henry of Martha's words about his own teaching gift. The next morning, during their daily coffee ritual, Sarah shared more news. "Remember that hybrid engine testing data? Our efficiency numbers are even better than projected. 3 major manufacturers want to discuss licensing." Henry nodded, but his attention was on a young woman who'd just walked into the garage. She carried herself with the same uncertain determination he'd seen in Sarah months ago, someone looking for a chance to prove themselves. "Welcome to Thompson Mason," he said, standing to greet her. "How can we help?" "I saw your notice," she replied, pulling out a worn application form. "I've been working on cars since I was 12, helping in my mom's shop. But with all the new technology, we couldn't keep up. Had to close last year." She straightened her shoulders. "I want to learn. Want to make sure no other family shops have to close because they can't bridge the gap between old and new." Henry caught Sarah's eye and saw his own smile reflected there. This was why they'd started this journey, not just to build better engines, but to build better futures. "Let's talk," he said, pulling up a chair. "And maybe after, you can show us what you know about timing belts. Because here we believe every lesson goes both ways." Henry stared at the tablet in his hands, his first personal one, a gift from Sarah for what she called their quarterly anniversary. The screen displayed his latest engine diagnostic report, complete with annotations he'd made using the stylus. 6 months ago, he would have written everything in his trusty pocket notebook. Now, his digital notes synchronized automatically with their research database. "Look who's embracing technology," Sarah teased, finding him practicing with the tablet's features during lunch. She sat down beside him, unwrapping one of Mrs. Henderson's signature sandwiches. "Though I notice you still keep that pencil behind your ear." "Some habits are worth keeping," Henry replied, tapping the screen to save his work. "Besides, pencils never need charging." Their easy banter was interrupted by an alert, a video call from one of the major manufacturers interested in their hybrid design. When such calls had made Henry nervous. Now he simply propped up the tablet and joined Sarah in discussing technical specifications and implementation timelines. "Your practical insights made the difference," Sarah told him after the call. "They have plenty of engineers, but someone who's spent 40 years actually fixing engines, that's irreplaceable." Henry nodded toward her own notepad, where she'd been sketching modifications to their original design. "Just like someone who's not afraid to question everything we think we know about engines. Your father would be proud." Sarah grew quiet, fingering the edge of her notebook. "I've been thinking about him a lot lately. Every time we solve a problem, I imagine telling him about it." She pulled out her phone, showing Henry a faded photograph. "This was his little shop. Nothing like what we have here, but he taught me everything starts with caring about the work." Through the office window, they could see Tyler mentoring Emma, their newest apprentice, through her first hybrid diagnostic test. The girl who'd walked in with determination was already showing the same gift for teaching that they'd seen in Tyler. "It's funny," Sarah mused, watching them. "When I first came back with the investor's offer, I thought I was the one with something to give. But I've learned more in these past months than in all my time in California." Henry understood. His own journey from reluctant tech user to confident innovator had taught him that growth wasn't about replacing the old with the new. It was about building bridges between them. The afternoon brought a surprise visit from Nancy, Martha's sister, who'd driven up from Florida to see the changes for herself. Henry gave her the full tour, watching her eyes widen at the sophisticated testing equipment and classroom spaces. "It's not quite what Martha imagined," Henry admitted as they stood in the original garage bay, now updated but still recognizable. "She thought maybe a few apprentices, not all this." Nancy squeezed his hand. "No, it's exactly what she imagined. Martha didn't see things as they were, remember? She saw what they could become, just like you did with Sarah's broken-down Honda." Later, after Nancy left, Henry found Sarah in the testing bay, running diagnostics on their latest prototype. She'd picked up his habit of laying a hand on the engine housing, feeling for vibrations that computers might miss. "I've been invited to speak at the National Engineering Conference," she said without looking up. "They want to hear about our integrated approach to innovation." She paused, then added, "I'd like you to present with me." Henry started to demur. Public speaking had never been his strength, but stopped himself. The old Henry might have hesitated. The new Henry had learned that every skill was just another kind of repair job, tackled one step at a time. "You know," he said instead, "I might have some insights worth sharing." Sarah's smile lit up the room. "That's exactly what I told them." "Oh, and they're especially interested in your tablet-based diagnostic system," Henry laughed, patting his pencil, "as long as I can bring my backup technology." Together, they turned back to the prototype, each bringing their unique perspective. To the task at hand, through the open door came the sounds of their growing community, students discussing theory, tools at work, and the persistent hum of progress built on respect for the past. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, its formal envelope standing out among the usual bills and catalogues. Inside was a document that made Henry's stomach tighten, a notice from Automax Incorporated, the largest chain of auto repair centers in the state. "Cease and desist," the heading read, "Patent infringement claim." Sarah found him still staring at the letter 20 minutes later. Her excited news about their latest prototype test results died on her lips when she saw his expression. "They're claiming they filed a patent for a similar hybrid system 6 months before we did," Henry explained, passing her the letter. "They want us to stop development, surrender our research data, and—" He paused, anger creeping into his voice. "Sign over our technology for reasonable compensation." Sarah scanned the document, her face darkening. "This is ridiculous. Our design is completely original. We have documentation going back to your first sketches, my college research, everything." "They know that," Henry said quietly. "This isn't about patents. Look at the parent company." Sarah flipped to the last page and understood. Automax was owned by Vista Automotive Group, one of the manufacturers they'd turned down for an exclusive licensing deal. The message was clear. If they couldn't buy the technology, they'd try to take it. The news spread through the garage like oil under a leaking gasket. Tyler overheard enough to look worried, and even the usually cheerful Emma was subdued. By afternoon, rumors had reached the town. Henry could tell by the way people glanced at the garage as they passed. "We need to call a meeting," Sarah decided, already reaching for her phone. "Get our legal team on this." The next morning, their conference room was filled with lawyers and patent experts. The discussion was technical, filled with terms like prior art and intellectual property precedent. But the message became clear. Fighting this would be expensive and time-consuming. "They're counting on that," Sarah realized. "They think we'll settle rather than risk a long legal battle." "It's a common tactic," one lawyer confirmed. "Big companies use their resources to overwhelm smaller innovators. Even if they lose eventually, they can delay your market entry, drain your funds." "And our students?" Henry interrupted. "The training program would have to be suspended during litigation," another lawyer advised. "Any new development could complicate the case." Henry stood abruptly and walked to the window. The garage was alive with activity, students learning, prototypes, being tested, real repairs happening alongside innovation. Everything they'd built was suddenly at risk. That evening, after everyone had left, Henry and Sarah sat in his office, surrounded by the evidence of their journey, the original notebook, prototype parts, student projects in various stages of completion. "We could fight it," Sarah said, determination in her voice. "I have contacts in Silicon Valley. We could raise more funds, hire the best lawyers, and spend the next 2 years in courtrooms instead of doing what we're meant to do." Henry finished. He picked up their latest diagnostic tool prototype. "You know what this reminds me of? Every time a big chain moved into town, they'd undercut prices, offer flashy services. Lots of small shops closed, but you didn't. No." Henry smiled. "Because Martha taught me something important. When you can't win by playing their game, you change the rules." He pulled out his tablet, still keeping his pencil as backup, and opened their research files. "Look at what we've actually created here. It's not just the hybrid engine. It's the whole system, the diagnostic tools, the training methods, the integration of old and new." Sarah caught on, her eyes lighting up. "The engine patent is just one piece. Our real innovation is the way we bring it all together." Henry nodded. "Something they can't replicate with just lawyers and money. They want our technology? Fine. But the heart of what we do, that's not in any patent. They worked through the night, fueled by Mrs. Henderson's coffee and decades of combined experience. By morning they had a plan, one that would turn Automax's challenge into an opportunity." "It's risky," Sarah admitted, looking at their proposal. "We'll have to move faster than we planned, commit more resources. Sometimes the biggest risk," Henry said, thinking of a broken-down Honda and a life-changing decision, "is not taking one when it matters." They gathered their team early before the garage opened. Tyler and Emma stood with the other students, concern and determination mingling. On their faces, Henry looked at them, the future they were fighting for, and began to explain their countermove. The patent application sprawled across Henry's desk looked nothing like the one Automax was contesting. This wasn't just about a hybrid engine anymore. It was about something much bigger. Sarah had spent weeks working with their legal team to ensure every detail was perfect before filing. "Open Source Integrated Vehicle Maintenance and Innovation System," read the title. Below it were hundreds of pages detailing not just technology, but an entire philosophy of automotive repair and development. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, reviewing the final draft. "We're not just patenting a piece of technology, we're patenting a way of thinking." The application covered their entire integrated approach. The diagnostic tools that combined traditional mechanical wisdom with cutting-edge sensors. The teaching methods that bridged generation gaps, the community involvement programs, and the continuous feedback loop between repair shop and research lab. "Automax can try to copy our engine design," Henry noted, "but they can't replicate 40 years of hands-on experience combined with next-generation engineering. Not without understanding how it all works together." Their new strategy was already taking shape. Instead of fighting Automax's claims, they would transform their entire operation into something the corporate giant couldn't easily duplicate. The garage had become a living laboratory where every repair contributed to their research and every innovation improved their repair capabilities. Tyler arrived with their latest breakthrough, a diagnostic tool he'd helped design that incorporated everything they'd learned. It looked deceptively simple, like a traditional mechanics tool, but contained sophisticated sensors and AI capabilities that learned from each use. "Watch this," he said, demonstrating on a customer's car. The tool gathered data like any modern scanner, but also guided the user through time-tested diagnostic steps. It was like having a master mechanics experience in digital form. "The best part," Emma added, "is how it gets smarter with each repair. When we find a solution that works better than the standard procedure, the system learns and adapts. Henry watched their young apprentices work, remembering his own early days of discovering new ways to solve problems. Now, those discoveries wouldn't be lost. They'd be preserved and built upon by future generations. Sarah had been right about moving faster. In just 3 weeks, they'd accelerated their development timeline dramatically. The pressure from Automax had forced them to crystallize ideas that had been percolating for months. The garage floor had become an innovation hub. Traditional repair bays now featured hybrid testing equipment. Students moved seamlessly between computer analysis and hands-on mechanical work. Even the old-timers who brought in their classic cars found themselves fascinated by the blend of old and new techniques. "Remember that Mustang that no one could diagnose?" Henry asked Sarah, pointing to a success story in their database. "Emma solved it using both the AI system and that old timing light I taught her to use. The computer spotted the pattern, but the visual confirmation made the diagnosis certain. Their patent application detailed dozens of such cases. Real-world problems solved through the integration of traditional knowledge and modern technology. It wasn't just theory, it was proven methodology backed by measurable results." The local paper ran a story about their approach, featuring interviews with satisfied customers and successful students. The headline read, "Local Garage Revolutionizes Auto Repair Training." Below it was a photo of Henry and Sarah with their team, standing proud in front of the newly expanded facility. "Look at this section," Sarah said, highlighting a portion of their application. It detailed their community integration program, how local businesses could participate in the training program, how their diagnostic system could be shared with independent repair shops, how the entire town could become part of the innovation ecosystem. "It's not just about us anymore," Henry realized. "We're creating something bigger than Thompson Mason Innovations." That evening, as they reviewed the final draft one last time, a familiar Honda pulled into the lot. It was Sarah's old car, now being driven by her younger cousin who was starting college locally. "Needs a timing belt again," Sarah smiled. "Some things never change." "No," Henry replied, watching Tyler and Emma move to help, their tablets ready, but their hands instinctively reaching for traditional tools as well. "But some things change in just the right way." The patent application sat ready for submission, representing not just their response to a challenge, but their vision for the future, one where innovation grew from tradition, and every problem solved helped solve the next one. The magazine cover caught everyone by surprise. "Future of Auto Repair," proclaimed Popular Mechanics, featuring a striking photo of Henry and Sarah in the garage, surrounded by their unique blend of traditional tools and cutting-edge technology. The cover story's title read, "How a Small-Town Garage is Revolutionizing the Automotive Industry." Henry found copies appearing all over town. Mrs. Henderson had one on her coffee table. The diner laminated one for their wall. Even the local high school's automotive shop proudly displayed it alongside their certification certificates. "Page 12, Sarah said, finding Henry in his office early one morning. "Read what they wrote about our training program." The article detailed how Thompson Mason had created something unprecedented, a system where practical experience and technological innovation fed into each other continuously. It praised their open-source approach, noting how it could save countless small repair shops from obsolescence. In an age where vehicles are becoming increasingly computerized, the article read, "Most repair shops face a stark choice: invest in expensive proprietary systems or close their doors. Thompson Mason offers a third way, one that preserves the invaluable knowledge of experienced mechanics while embracing technological advancement." The phone hadn't stopped ringing since the article hit newsstands. Independent garage owners from across the country wanted to know more about their training program. Technology companies were interested in collaboration. Universities sought partnerships. "Look at this email," Sarah said, showing Henry her tablet. 3 more state technical Colleges want to implement our curriculum, and that automotive software company I told you about. They want to integrate our diagnostic protocols into their next update. Henry nodded, but his attention was on Tyler, who was being interviewed by a local TV station. The young man was explaining their hybrid diagnostic system to the reporter, showing the same patience and clarity that had made him their star instructor. The best part, Tyler was saying, is how it preserves what we call mechanics intuition. The AI learns from experienced technicians, while the hands-on training ensures new mechanics develop those same instincts. The media attention had an unexpected effect on Cedar Grove. Tourism increased as people detoured to visit the now-famous garage. Local businesses thrived with the influx of visitors and students. The town council was discussing plans for an annual technology and trades festival. Remember when Automax thought they could shut us down? Sarah mused, watching a group of visitors tour their facility. Now they're one of the companies asking about licensing our training system. The irony wasn't lost on Henry. Their response to the challenge had created something more valuable than the original hybrid engine design. They'd built a bridge between tradition and innovation that the entire industry needed. Emma rushed in, excitement clear on her face. "You need to see this. Our diagnostic app just hit 50,000 downloads." She showed them the statistics on her tablet. Independent mechanics across the country were adopting their system, contributing their own knowledge to the growing database. Bisu Wan article had captured something essential about their success. It wasn't just about technology or tradition, but about respect for both. Each download of their app, each inquiry about their training program, represented another step toward preserving and evolving the craft they loved. Later that day, a familiar face appeared in the doorway. Mike Peterson, the hardware store owner, who'd been inspired to restart his small engine repair service, stood beaming with a folder in his hand. "Just got approved as a satellite training location," he announced proudly. "Starting with lawnmowers and generators, but who knows? Maybe someday we'll be working on hybrid engines too." Henry watched as Sarah immediately began discussing implementation plans with Mike. The ripple effects of their work were spreading, creating opportunities they hadn't imagined. Each success story, each adaptation of their methods, proved that innovation didn't have to mean leaving tradition behind. The magazine lay open on his desk, its glossy pages reflecting the afternoon light. Henry's eyes fell on the article's closing lines. "In a world rushing toward automation, Thompson Mason reminds us that the future belongs not to those who simply embrace the new, but to those who know how to bring the best of the past forward with them." The apprenticeship program brochure was hot off the press, its glossy pages outlining a vision that had grown far beyond anything Henry had imagined that day when Sarah's Honda broke down. Thompson Mason Institute of Automotive Innovation read, the cover beneath a photo of their expanded facility. "First official semester starts next month," Sarah said, setting a stack of acceptance letters on Henry's desk. 25 students, full scholarships. Veterans, career changers, kids right out of high school, all of them ready to bridge the gap between old and new. The brochure detailed their revolutionary curriculum, hands-on mechanical training combined with cutting-edge technology, business, management courses, and even basic programming. Every student would learn both traditional diagnostics and modern innovations, ensuring they could handle everything from classic cars to the latest electric vehicles. Tyler finished the virtual reality training module, Sarah continued, pulling up a demonstration on her tablet. The program allowed students to practice complex repairs in a simulation before working on actual vehicles. He integrated all your diagnostic techniques. It's like having you there teaching each student personally. Henry watched the simulation, amazed at how accurately it captured the subtle details he'd learned over decades. And Emma's contribution? Her AI assistance program is ready too. It helps students develop that intuition you always talk about, learning to read the signs, understand the whole system, not just the individual parts. Through the window, Henry could see their first group of certified graduates working with newer students. The knowledge transfer was happening organically, creating a sustainable cycle of learning and innovation. Each generation added their own insights to the growing database of automotive wisdom. The State University called again, Sarah mentioned, pulling up an email. They want to make us their official automotive technology campus, said our hands-on approach fills a critical gap in their engineering program. The opportunity was significant. University backing would bring additional resources and credibility, while their practical focus would give engineering students real-world experience they couldn't get elsewhere. A commotion from the shop floor drew their attention. A group of students had gathered around a unique project, a classic Mustang being converted to a hybrid using their patented system. The owner, a retired engineer, had specifically sought them out for the conversion. That's the third classic conversion this month, Henry noted. Seems a lot of people want to preserve their old cars while making them more efficient. Speaking of preservation, Sarah said, look what the development team finished. She opened a complex database on her tablet. We're calling it the Master Mechanic Archive. It captures not just repair procedures, but the whole diagnostic process, the way experienced mechanics think through problems. The archive was a living repository of automotive knowledge, combining traditional wisdom with modern data analysis. Every repair contributed to its growth, making it more comprehensive and adaptable over time. As they discussed implementation plans, Tyler appeared with news about their satellite program. 10 independent garages across the state had completed certification to offer Thompson Mason training. Each location would combine local expertise with their standardized curriculum, creating a network of innovation centers. Remember when we worried about losing traditional knowledge? Sarah asked, watching a young apprentice confidently switch between a classic timing light and their latest diagnostic tablet. Now we're not just preserving it, we're evolving it. The afternoon brought a surprise visit from a former skeptic, the Automax executive who had once tried to shut them down. Now he came with a different agenda, a proposal for collaboration rather than competition. Your approach works, he admitted, reviewing their success metrics. We tried replicating it, but realized something crucial. It's not just about the technology or even the training methods. It's about the culture you've built, the way you respect both tradition and innovation. After he left, Henry and Sarah walked through their facility. The original garage bay remained the heart of the operation, surrounded by modern additions that had grown organically from their needs. Students moved seamlessly between spaces, equally comfortable with wrenches and wireless diagnostics. You know what this reminds me of, Henry said, watching the activity around them. An engine. All these different parts working together, each one essential, each one making the others better. Sarah smiled, understanding the metaphor. And like any good engine, it's not just about the individual components. It's about how they work together to create something greater than the sum of their parts. The new sign gleamed in the morning sun, Mason and Thompson Automotive Innovation Center, in elegant brushed steel letters mounted beside the original hand-painted Mason's Auto Repair sign that Martha had lovingly maintained for so many years. Together, they told the story of how far they'd come and what they'd preserved along the way. 1 year to the day since Sarah had returned in that private jet, the garage was hosting a celebration. Former students, local business owners, and community members gathered to mark not just their success, but the revival of Cedar Grove itself. Henry stood in his office doorway, watching the crowd. Tyler was demonstrating their latest diagnostic system to a group of visiting mechanics, his confidence and teaching skill a testament to how much he'd grown. Emma led tours of the research facility, explaining how they combined traditional mechanical wisdom with cutting-edge technology. Penny, for your thoughts? Sarah appeared beside him, holding 2 cups of coffee, their morning ritual unchanged. despite everything else that had transformed around them. Just remembering that broken-down Honda, Henry smiled. How sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest decisions. The garage floor had been cleared for the occasion, transformed into a space that showcased their journey. Display cases held artifacts of their evolution, Martha's old sign-painting brushes, Sarah's original notebook, the first prototype of their hybrid system, and the threatening letter from Automax that had pushed them to innovate beyond their original plans. Mrs. Henderson arrived with her famous pastries, now served at a cafe she'd opened adjacent to the training center. Mike Peterson was there too, proudly wearing his Satellite Training Center instructor badge. The whole town had found ways to grow alongside them. "Henry," called a familiar voice. Nancy had made the trip up from Florida again, this time bringing Martha's old recipe box. "Found these in my attic, thought they belonged here." Inside, beneath the recipes, were Martha's earliest sketches for the garage's layout, including notes about future expansion that seemed remarkably prescient. The formal ceremony began at noon. The mayor spoke about economic revival. The state university dean announced their new partnership, and former students shared success stories. But the most meaningful moment came when Tyler and Emma unveiled their surprise. "We've been working on something special," Tyler announced, gesture to a covered display. "A way to honor where we came from and where we're going." The sheet fell away to reveal an interactive historical display. On one side was a restored version of Henry's original workbench, complete with his father's tools. On the other, their latest diagnostic system. But the centerpiece was a digital wall showing the faces and stories of every student, every innovation, every small triumph that had built their legacy. "We call it the Living Legacy System," Emma explained. "It captures and preserves not just the technical knowledge, but the heart of what makes this place special. Every new student adds to it, every graduate becomes part of the story." Henry felt Sarah's hand slip into his as they watched their past, present, and future merge in this touching tribute. She'd come so far from the determined young woman with a broken-down car and brilliant ideas. He'd come far too, from a lonely mechanic to a mentor and innovator who had helped transform an entire community. The afternoon brought a surprise. A young woman arrived in a familiar-looking Honda, its engine making a distinctive sound that Henry recognized immediately. "Timing belt?" he asked with a knowing smile. "Actually," she replied, "I'm here about the training program. My dad always said that when you find someone who really cares about doing things right, you stick with them." She paused. "He fixed cars too, before the big chains moved in. I'd like to learn how to do what you've done here, keep the best of the old while building something new." Henry glanced at Sarah, seeing his own emotions reflected in her eyes. They'd come full circle, but the circle had grown to encompass so much more than they'd imagined. Later, after the crowds had gone and the evening light painted long shadows across the shop floor, Henry and Sarah sat in his office. The old photo of Martha still held its place of honor, now accompanied by dozens of others. Their first prototype, their first graduating class, moments of triumph and challenge that had shaped their journey. "You know," Sarah said, scrolling through designs for their next innovation on her tablet, "when I first came back with that offer, I thought I was bringing the future to Cedar Grove. Turns out the future was already here. It just needed someone to believe in it." Henry nodded, picking up his trusty pencil, still kept sharp despite all the digital tools at his disposal. "Martha used to say, every good mechanic knows that fixing things isn't just about replacing what's broken. It's about making things better than they were before." Through the window, they could see Cedar Grove's main street, now lit up and bustling with activity. The town, like their garage, had found its way forward by embracing both change and tradition. And in the heart of it all, a small garage had become something extraordinary, a place where past and future worked together in perfect harmony. The diagnostic scanner on Henry's desk beeped softly, its screen showing the results of their latest innovation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students, new opportunities to bridge the gap between old and new. But for now, in the quiet of the evening, they sat together in comfortable silence. Two unlikely partners who had discovered that the best futures are built on foundations of respect for the past.